So I'm speaking with composer Richard Harvey, who has been composing for film and television for many, many years. He has an established a relationship with Mr. Hans Zimmer, who he co-composed Le Petit Prince with, The Little Prince, which will be coming out in July. And I've been a huge fan of his for such a long time. Richard, thank you so much for talking today.
Hello, Kai. Great pleasure to be with you.
So, kind of rewinding kind of back, I'd love to know at what point did film and TV music come into your life, and what kind of really got you interested in music at the very beginning?
Well, actually, the interest came from my family, and I was thinking about this earlier. Your question has just provoked me to think more, because it's actually amazing how many musicians come from musical families.
Right, yeah.
And actually a hell of a lot of sportsmen and women come from sporting families. So I think so much more so than any other profession. Maybe acting, there tends to be a bit of that as well. But it's really extraordinary. I mean, that said, my father was a musician. He was briefly a professional composer during his early professional life, but he found that a bit tough and went on to do other things. But what that meant was that he had, as I was growing up, I mean, from day one, really, he had a kind of composer's room. He has a composer's study. He had a piano. He had the big pile of empty manuscript paper and all the sharpened pencils and the metronome and all the things that you need, and a big record collection, and he listened a lot. And whereas my brother and my sister, I don't think it ever occurred to them for a moment to become musicians. It was always what I was going to do from my earliest memory onwards.
And so what kind of paths did your siblings take? That's kind of interesting. So they didn't stick on the musical path. They went on their own.
No, well, they went different paths. My sister is now a happy mother with grown-up kids.
Yeah.
And but my brother went into the media, but he went into broadcasting, initially in radio, and then he went into in-flight entertainment. So he actually uses a lot of my music, which is nice.
Wow,
But
yeah.
completely different pathways. But I don't think I copied my father, but I was just completely influenced by
Right.
everything he liked. He took me to concerts. All the music he liked, I naturally was drawn to. The music he didn't like, I naturally didn't find an affinity with. And it was just great having a piano around with music always on the stand. And every time I wanted to learn an instrument, I could always do that, And the music's always been my life. It's been my first language, really.
Yeah. So at what point did the idea for film and television composing come in? What did that kind of segue start?
Well, it was an interesting one. It's everything happened very early for me. I left school quite early, and I went to the Royal College of Music in London, and I went there young. I was still 16 when I started at the Royal College of Music, and I graduated early, and I left, I guess, when I was 18. And at that time, I was starting to get offers to play on film scores, because I played some interesting instruments, some unusual instruments. I'd been really studying early music at college and throughout my time at school, and I played instruments like the recorder and all the other sort of more peculiar woodwind instruments of the medieval and Renaissance period. I'd also tried a few folk instruments, and so I don't know. I just suddenly found I was getting offered work playing on quite big film scores when I was 19 or 20, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And I saw these composers breezing in, either from the left, if it was someone like Maurice Jarre coming in from Paris, or from the right, if it was John Williams coming in from LA. And I was just so inspired by what these guys were doing, and I was so in awe of seeing the film up on the screen in the studio. And, you know, because I was always playing some kind of solo instrument, I'd always sneak into the booth and have a listen.
Right.
And I was hooked right from that point. And what really worked out well for me, I then went on and formed a band, and I went with that band, made 5 albums and toured for a few years.
Wow.
And by the time I got out of that band, I guess I was at a better age. I would have been 24, 25 when my band finally split up.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of age where I could actually concentrate. I didn't even know I was a writer. It was being in a band that made me write. Not because I had music trying to come out of me all the time. It's only because the other members of the band were so lazy they didn't write anything. So it fell to me to do it. And eventually I thought, okay, I've unlocked this one and I can write, and I'm going to enjoy it. So I was then free to sort of go back into the world of commercial writing.
Right.
And I didn't feel intimidated by it the way I would have done 3 or 4 years earlier. So, but it felt. I mean, right now in the 21st century, I think there's a very great freedom. People can write anything you like, or anything they like. They express themselves in any way they can, and you know, the great audience out there on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube will decide whether they like it or not. But you know, in the 1980s, the 70s and the 80s, you had to fight your way through a forest of critics.
Right. Yeah.
Or you'd have to convince a management company or an agency that you could be taken on and that you were worth pursuing. So it was really easy to feel quite intimidated by the whole idea of becoming a professional composer. In some ways, it's more difficult to start out now because there's so much competition.
I know, it's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I guess I found a route through that jungle in the late 70s, early 80s.
And glad you did. Yeah, glad you got through the jungle.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed the ride, you know.
And but I mean, looking at your career, you know, a lot of composers, really anyone in the business, feels it's necessary to kind of flock to Los Angeles to pursue this career of film and TV and fame and fortune and all that stuff. But you managed to produce your career and keep it at home in the UK. Was there a reason you decided to stay in the UK and never come to or relocate?
Yeah, because it's film, and it's actually, it's not a thing you can arrive in LA and say, which is, this isn't the only thing I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have to arrive in LA saying, look, I don't care if I never see my family again. All I want to do is give myself to film music.
Right.
They like that kind of level of total commitment. And I've always had the idea that I can't be what I am as a musician if I don't do other things. Mm-hmm. And throughout my career, I've played concerts, not just of film music. I've played concerts of Baroque music. Mm-hmm. I've conducted orchestras. I've written music for theatre. I've written music for TV. I mean, there was a time where you couldn't go to LA and be somebody who worked on film and TV. It was unthinkable.
Right, yeah.
I'd never wanted to cut TV out of my life. I'd never wanted to cut doing commercials out of my life, and certainly not playing classical music and taking part in concerts. So I felt that staying in London, I could really have a fully rounded musical life. And half the things, or more than half the things that interested me would simply be missing, wouldn't be available to me in LA.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I never heard that perspective before. It's always
and I think, you know, one of the, this will link up to any questions that we might discuss relating to Little Prince. Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes you just need to get someone involved who's come at it from a different direction.
True, yeah. From a different background.
different background, different form of musical schooling through life.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I guess that we can segue a little bit into Little Prince that way, because you worked with your friend Hans Zimmer
Yep.
on Little Prince, and you know, it's directed by the great Mark Osborne, who directed Kung Fu Panda, and actually one of my favorite short films of his, which we watched in film school, and I still watch today, is More. I really love his short.
Yeah, it's a great little film, isn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic, and here you collaborated with Hans on the music. Now you have a great history with Hans, and so how did this collaboration come to be? What made Le Petit Prince the right project for you two?
Well, you know, I think that Hans had a good experience working with John Powell on the two Panda movies.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, John Powell, like myself, comes very much from a classical background, steeped in classical music.
Right, yeah.
And I think, you know, Hans felt it was time to collaborate with someone else, but he didn't want to collaborate with someone who was completely new to him. And of course, he and I have been friends since the late 70s. And we've always said we don't work with each other enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to understand why. I'm over here in London. He's got the world beating a path to his door in Santa Monica.
Right.
You know, he's just got no shortage of offers of people to work with him. And that's fine. I'm not there knocking on his door. But, you know, when Little Prince first came up, he said to Nick Lenny Smith, who is a great mutual friend.
Absolutely, yeah.
He said, you know, why don't we work on this together? And Nick said, well, hey, why don't you get Richard involved? Because this sounds just so up his street. And actually, I think Nick wanted that to happen, and Hans ended up wanting that to happen too. And in the end, kind of Nick quietly backed out of it and just left Hans and I to get on with it, which was an incredibly selfless thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he just so believed that there'd be the right chemistry.
And I mean, so what was that collaboration like? Did you two work independently and then combine ideas, or did you actually sit with Hans in a room and hash it out together?
Well, it's an interesting one because I wasn't party to the early discussions with Mark, but quite clearly they wanted a very different approach to this.
Mm-hmm.
They did not want standard issue animation music. Not old school standard issue animation music. Not, you know, the modern equivalent either. They wanted something completely different that felt a little bit more like art and would be not only acceptable to the markets of France and Germany,
mm-hmm.
and let's say Canada, you know, where there's a strong affiliation with the book Little Prince.
Right.
They wanted something that kind of shared the magic, not only of the writing of the book, but also of the watercolors and the kind of, if you like, the magic realism of the whole thing. And that the initial discussions actually revolved around looking at French classical music, Ravel, Debussy, Saint-Saëns, and, you know, even French film music. And so it's like I was brought in as the classical specialist,
mm-hmm.
and Hans was going to more look after the songs.
Okay.
And but of course, any project that Hans is involved in, he brings his creativity and his, you know, unparalleled level of experience.
Right. I mean,
and actually, you know, one thing about Hans is, you know, so much is known about him, but the effort and the effort that he puts in every time to seek out originality in a new way of approaching in any kind of music for any kind of film. It's almost like the first suggestion that you make he will never accept because he has to say, hey guys, let's look for a parallel universe here.
Yeah.
You know, let's get our first three great ideas and then throw them all in the bin and go for something different. And so often that leads you down a new path, and that's certainly what happened here. I mean, the working together was, I think it was very much a three-way thing with Mark. Mark is a great director, and he's a really lovely guy. But I've just been so impressed by the way that he carries this vision with him of the movie, and you know how focused he is on his storytelling. Now, like so many directors, he doesn't really have the ability to imagine how the music will be.
Mm-hmm.
And if he did, he'd be writing it himself.
Right, yeah.
Which I'm glad he wouldn't, because when most directors try and do that, it ends up with really poor results, as we all know.
Right.
But anyway, he is so clear when he hears something that is right, that harmonizes with his vision for the movie. He really encourages it, and you know, he then starts to fire off some ideas, and you know, why don't we do this, why don't we do that? And so in the end, it was sort of collaboration in the discussions about it. But you know, the score tended to be more my responsibility, and the songs and the production of the songs was Hans's, because there were three really important songs in this. And, you know, obviously there was a temp score in place, something I don't like, and a lot of people don't like.
Right, yeah.
Not to say there was anything wrong with the material in the temp score, but, you know, the sooner it goes, the better. And that's a particular problem with songs. And, you know, first of all, we wanted to, you know, the temp songs were all American. And we said, you know, we still want to, you know, because with Jeff Bridges voicing the lead character, it was sounding pretty American. And we wanted to just revisit the French roots of this story, which is why Hans eventually contacted Camille Dalmay, whose voice is the true voice of this film and is so French and so beautiful and so original.
Oh, she is beautiful. She did a Ratatouille, I think, with Michael Giacchino.
Sure. And I mean, you know, she brings something so special to this. Mm-hmm. And rather than, you know, half the team of this film thinking, well, whatever we end up with as the songs in these films, we're not going to love them as much as the ones that were there throughout the gestation process of this film. Actually, what they've got is stuff they love so much more. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's all original. It belongs to them. It belongs to the score. It belongs to the film. It belongs to the characters. And just for once, it just feels like the score and the songs grow in and out of each other.
That's important. I think that
it's great, because they just don't feel bolted on. They feel like they come from the mind of the characters. Mm-hmm. And that's what Mark was always going to achieve. That's what he sets out to achieve. There's something so organic about the way he plans the arc of his story.
Right. So I mean, what was informing, I guess, the score? I mean, you're talking about the coming from the mind of the characters, but like, what was when you first came onto the project? What really spoke to you? Was it the plot? I mean, I'm sure it was the characters, the setting, and emotion. But what really kind of got that first note out? Like, what was the kind of first kind of thing?
The book, definitely the book.
The book.
I mean, before I even saw the film, I wrote 3 or 4 themes.
Oh wow!
Just from reading the book. And, you know, those 3 or 4 themes have ended up as strong themes within the movie. So I felt that I was right to do that. You know, at that time, I had more time to work on it because Hans was finishing his previous film and was preparing to work on the Grammys. So I had a little bit of time, and I thought, I'll get some ideas in just from reading the book. And I'm very glad I did. Because anything that is right for the book is right for this film, although the film is not of the book.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it has to be its own thing as well.
Anything that harmonizes with the book will suit this film, but the film is not of the book.
Mm-hmm. So when you're working with Hans and you're working with Mark or Hans, and there is a disagreement or there is something where you guys kind of contrast ideas, how do you get through that? Is it just kind of a hash it out, talk with each other, trying to do you try to convince them your point of view? Do you try to see the other person's point of view? I mean, how do you work through that kind of collaborative process where one of you disagrees?
Well, there's a two-word answer to that question,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Bob Badamy. Bob is the greatest little referee to have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a boxing match, he'd be this tiny guy coming in and pushing the two great fighters apart from each other and sending them to the corners. But of course, it never comes to that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, Bob's take on all of this, and it's something that I agree with wholeheartedly, is, you know, the movie comes first.
Right. Servicing the narrative.
You may think you've just written the best thing you've ever written in your life. Well, hey, buddy, save it for your next movie. Because, you know, the needs of this film are absolutely paramount, no pun intended. But seriously, Bob is a fantastic kind of barometer of, you know, he's like a policeman who's got the full length of the score in his head the whole time. And if something doesn't gel with it, he knows. Because when you're writing, you tend to concentrate on that little chunk of film you're working on.
Right.
Whereas Bob just kind of watches the whole film twice a day. You know, and he tries things in different places. He moves things around. And the guy's so experienced. He's got to be the best score wrangler in town. And it was just great. I worked and got to know Bob with in the days of Da Vinci Code, but this is the first time I've done a complete score with him, and he was really inspirational. But you know, it's a very happy room, Hans's room, and we just play ideas to the director. We don't say who wrote them.
Yeah.
And if the director says, well, I kind of like the orchestration of that idea, but I like the material of the second idea, or I like the beginning of the first idea and I like the end of the second idea, we just sort it out, you know, because if you take the view the movie comes first, then you listen to what the director has to say. And when you've got a great guy and a great director like Mark, if you really believe that something is getting missed, you know, and we're talking ourselves out of using a great bit of music, then he will listen. You say, Mark, just before we go away from this, I've worked on this overnight. Have a listen to this. And he may say, no, I still think we should go the other way. Or he may say, oh, thank you for doing that. I can see that now. That works great. So, you know, when you have a happy project like this one was, and you know, I feel that it was a quartet of Hans, myself, Bob, and Mark.
Which it
sort
should
of creating,
be. Yeah, I like the whole collaborative process.
Together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. I mean, and I think that's the best way to get things done. You bounce ideas. I mean, there's a lot of these purists out there that go, it has to be the singular one vision, blah 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 blah. But I think it's better when ideas mesh with other ideas, and it becomes something that you never expected it to be.
Oh yes, I mean, you know, you've only got to look at the way scripts are written.
Right, that too. Yeah.
You know, and that's how you get such great scripts in the States.
Mm-hmm. It's comparative.
You get 6 people working on them, and you end up with no weakness in there anywhere.
Right. Because it's hard to see your own weaknesses, I think. You need another pair of eyes or ears.
Sure, and to create a really, you know, a really good score that is, you know, over an hour's music in a really short space of time. You know, it's tough for anyone to just keep their mind on the big picture, which is what you have to do. Anyone with talent can produce a minute's worth of great music. But to create a score that works as a score takes spending quite a bit of time standing back from it.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, I'd have to be a lot better composer than I am to say, hey guys, I'm doing it all myself, and I'm not going to listen to anyone's advice. I don't need to listen to the director. I don't need to listen to Bob Badamy, you know. So, fine. No, we had a happy score, and we're all really proud of the results.
And you were talking about how earlier you were talking about how Hans kind of pushes for those first ideas to kind of get something new, original, creative. And I feel like animated films, they really lend themselves to that kind of musical creativity, because a unique soundscape and world has to be built. So I mean, and you talked about you wrote some music by just reading the book, but what kind of instrumentation or stylings did you use? Did it take some experimenting to find the right sound of the score? Or was it kind of obvious from Mark's kind of vision?
No, nothing was obvious. We could have gone in almost any direction, except that it wasn't going to be an electronic score.
Right.
First of all, I should say something about the film. The film is a modern story which features references to the book of the Little Prince. Mm-hmm. So when you go into the world of the Little Prince, the animation style is completely different. It's stop motion, beautiful stop motion animation using paper characters. And when you're in the modern world, the real world, it's all CG animation. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to do was create a style of music for the Little Prince's world and a style of music for the modern world, because the modern world was essentially a world without a lot of heart. And yet the heart was the center of the Little Prince's world. Mm-hmm. And we knew that we wanted to bring these two styles together towards the end of the movie, because that's the way it worked. So we opted to go for an orchestral score. I mean, particularly as we'd started out looking at classical music.
Right, yes.
And we played a lot of classical music up against the picture. And we knew that a lot of the tenderness and luminosity of this music suited the film really well. And, we were really moving away from music synchronizing to picture. For an animation, there's unbelievably little of that.
Right, yeah.
And that became our kind of rule of thumb. If we found that we were sort of Mickey Mousing it, we'd just stop and unravel it and start again.
Yeah, hit the stop button.
Yeah, exactly.
Abort.
Yeah, so we used a big orchestra. And we were going to use a female choir, but actually we ended up asking Camille to do the job of the choir, which sounded very different and very beguiling, I must say. Mm-hmm. But we also made a point of using a number of interesting instruments. For example, we used in the keyboard section of the orchestra, we had a grand piano, but we also had two upright pianos, one of which was deliberately out of tune. We used a reed organ, and we used an accordion. We used various unusual woodwind instruments. I played quite a bit of recorder on the score and a bit of mandolin. So there was a kind of historic and ethnic side of it. It was, I suppose the score that I listened to a lot before tackling this was Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Oh, beautiful score. I love that score.
Okay. And we're more orchestral than that, but that
right.
tapestry of odd little acoustic sounds is always there.
And it seems like a perfect fit too. And I know I spoke to another composer. He worked on a film, and he said, yeah, it was the producers were kind of looking at that style or that kind of sound for
I think that was very much a personal thing. I don't think I was particularly pushed by either Mark or Hans to look that way, but I just said that we need a little cadre of instruments sitting within our orchestra that's not unlike the sound of Fantastic Mr. Fox. And, nobody disagreed with that. So we did go to some degree down that road, and it worked nicely. But this score's got a lot of tunes in it. It's got a lot of melodies.
Well, that's great. I love melodies. So
yeah, well, it's you certainly would know you'd heard a few themes when you leave the theatre after this one.
Oh, that's good. But I mean, looking at the story, The Little Prince as a whole, it's such a widely known and it's been adapted into many variations, including the well-known live-action film with Bob Fosse and Gene Wilder. And did that make it a challenge to make sure this felt unique and new, or was it? Was it daunting of a task to be like, okay, this has been told for generations and generations in different media and different ways. How are we going to make it our own?
Well, no, because there are a number of reasons why I don't think the Gene Wilder film was even remotely relevant to this. First of all, this is a new generation of people that we're bringing to it. And you could say filming the book could replace the book. This movie doesn't in any way attempt to do that. What it does is draw people towards the book. This movie has done its job if anyone age 5 to 85 leaves the cinema saying, I must read that book. Or I read that book a long time ago, I must read it again. It couldn't be more dissimilar from the 70s version of the film. Incidentally, this movie is fully backed by the Saint-Exupéry family.
Oh, wow, that's terrific. Yeah.
And the film in the 70s was not at all. So, despite the fact this is literally not a filming of the book, it just makes references to the book.
Right.
Okay, it's called The Little Prince, and there's enough of the Little Prince in this story for you to accept that is the correct title of the film. What it does, it rouses your curiosity in the character and the book to such an extent that I don't think anyone would not reread the book after going to see this film.
I mean, it makes me want to read the book right now. So
yeah, but I tell you what, this is not a remake of anything, and it's not sort of competition for anything that happened in the past, or frankly, very likely for anything that's going to happen in the future. It is very much its own thing. It's of its time, and I hope that it will succeed in its aim of bringing a whole new generation to the book.
Absolutely.
And in fact, another thing that in some ways although it's not the book, in some ways it fills a gap that was in the book. And this is something that Camille was very interested in. She said growing up in France, she always knew the book and she always loved the book. But she felt heartbroken that there wasn't a female character in it.
Which now you have.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, the closest to a female character was the character of the Rose in the book, who was a negative and selfish character. And now with the little girl being really the lead character of this film, and the little girl is a superstar, not only voiced by a superstar, but this girl is she's got a great heart, she's incredibly resourceful, she's incredibly loving, she's in a world that doesn't suit her. So she's so drawn to this story because it's all about the heart. It's perfect. It's filling a massive gap for a lot of people in introducing a really major female character to the story, which is terrific.
And which it is. And I mean, I love seeing, and it is kind of the drawing makes it relatable, I think, to other children or adults anywhere. If you're relatable to that story and be able to connect to that Little Prince story, I think it's. You get emotional just from watching the trailer. So it's.
Well, I tell you what, my wife and I went to the premiere at Cannes, and it's a big theatre there,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, felt like 2,000 people,
Wow.
something like that. And of course, most of the people, or many of the people in that theatre, will be French and will be, well aware of the story.
Right.
And, I was sitting a couple of rows back from Mark Osborne, thinking this is such a big moment for him. And he was sitting there clutching his little fox, which he's carried around with him everywhere. Even on the music sessions in London, he had his little fox with him. And at the end of the movie, everyone stood up and applauded and just kept applauding for about 20 minutes.
Wow.
It was extraordinary, and Mark was so overcome with emotion because he just knew that he'd really done a service for the film and its place in French history and French culture.
Mm-hmm.
When he was that well accepted by that crowd. It was a fantastic moment. I was, so glad I was there to witness it. Fantastic moment.
And and talking, you're retelling the story. Well, you're connecting to this story. So maybe it's not. This question is not really just for this version of The Little Prince, but I think there's a large negative commentary on remakes and reboots and adaptations and sequels, complaining of lack of originality. And while there is surely a financial reason for studios to go back to these kind of films, I think it speaks more to me to the human nature of storytelling, of loving how your mom or dad read you your favorite stories as a child, their interpretation. I mean, do you think it's important to keep retelling our favorite stories, our favorite fairy tales, our favorite adventures for future generations?
Well, yes, I do, but I don't think that's what's happened here.
No,
and I
yeah.
think we've covered that.
Right.
What is nice is that this film is Mark Osborne's story.
Right.
And the two screenwriters have finished it for him, but it is his story. But the family of Saint-Exupéry approve it and they love it. And like I say, it will bring people to the book
Mm-hmm.
in the best possible way. And what I didn't know, and Mark told me at the recording sessions in London, he said the whole Saint-Exupéry family don't take any money from the sales of the book or the film or any of the merchandise. It's all, excuse me, it's a charitable foundation.
Oh, wow.
And it all goes to charity. And what they're doing is they're saying, right, well, we don't have a lot of time left before this book and all the images that are associated with this book go out of copyright. And, we want to make the definitive, the final, and the best statement that we can make about what this story really means
Mm-hmm.
before it becomes a free-for-all.
Right.
And that's, it's only in a few years' time that anybody can do anything with it. So it was incredibly important that the family, the estate of Saint-Exupéry really got behind this story, really loved it, really believed in it. And in a way, it's the opposite of retelling a story, because it's a new story and because it will take people right back to the book, right back to 1949 when the book was published.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I bought myself a 1953 copy of the book, a French copy in French, and just sort of kept it with me all the time I was working on it. And it is a lovely thing. And of course, I've read the story in English and, looked at all the illustrations. And it's a beautiful thing. It's I think, the third most translated book in history.
Yeah, it's up there. It's one of the most treasured, beloved. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what has been done here is very respectful, but it's also really good entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But sure, there will be some reviews that will that will carp at this and say, well, what's this all about? This is not the story of the Little Prince. It's taken a very French story and Americanized it, and why have these cartoon characters got such big eyes and all that sort of thing. But actually, even the reviewers so far who've just leaned a little in that direction, they've all come back and say, actually, I don't want to trash this film because I think it's going to be loved by generations.
Right, and it's been great reviews. You guys have gotten amazing reviews since the debut at Cannes, and I think it'll be opening in the States in July, I believe, right?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, no?
Well, maybe you know better than I. I know it will be released in France in July.
Okay, maybe that's what I was
I know
thinking.
it's going to be released in the UK in October, which is a long gap after
Okay, so maybe
France.
the States will be coming around later then.
Yeah, I would think later in the year. But I do think there's such honesty in this film that I don't think it'll produce much in the way of cynical commentary.
I mean, yeah, unless you have a real Grinch out there just praying to...
Oh, well, there'll be some of those, but they'll find themselves overwhelmed by disagreement from others. So
right.
that'll be fine. That'll be fine. In fact, I'm going over to France for the I know it's had its premiere in Cannes, but the Paris opening will be a wonderful thing, and that's just about 7 weeks away now. So really looking forward to that.
I can't wait to see the film. Hopefully it gets over here to my area soon, because it looks truly wonderful, and I love Mark Osborne, and I love you and Hans. So I think it's such a
thank you.
Creative.
Well, I think it's worth looking forward to because it's a lovely film. It's absolutely visually stunning, beautiful.
Oh yeah, and the two animation styles. I think that's brilliantly used. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. But Richard, I mean, we've talked so much, and I don't want to keep you too long. You've given me so much information and everything, and it's been such a joy and an honor to chat with you today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Anytime.